Welcome to the Bogosity Podcast for the 23rd of July, 2012, the podcast that never made it to the center without biting. This is your host, Shane Killian. Let's undermine the confidence of the news of the bogus. We've covered in this podcast several occasions where government oppresses the homeless instead of helping them. Now, Clearwater, Florida is considering, get this, banning sitting on sidewalks. If passed, the bill would mean a $500 fine or 60 days in jail or both for sitting or lying down on a public right-of-way. They may even ban sleeping outside and bathing in public sinks, whatever that means. So if I'm tired and I just want to sit a minute, I can't do it? What if I'm feeling faint and I want to lie down? What if I've got something in my eye and I want to wash it out in the sink? Am I bathing? They did have just enough foresight to make exceptions for things like wheelchairs and baby carriages, sidewalk cafes, beaches, and during events such as parades. But there's still all the stuff they left out. I mean, can you take a blanket out to the park and have a picnic? They could just be honest and write in the law if you're homeless, which is clearly what they really want to do, but then it would be obvious what they were up to, as if it weren't already. In the past, the council has welded shut the doors to public bathrooms and turned off water to public areas. They've even discouraged donations to a soup kitchen. According to City Manager Bill Horn, quote, "We do have challenges on the street, and the public wants us to respond to those in a humane way." Yeah, making criminals out of people who aren't harming anyone else is so humane. Hey, Horn, maybe they wanted you to, actually help these people? Maybe? According to Public Defender Bob Dillinger, quote, "Arresting the homeless is the most expensive way to try and address the problem and the least effective. The general rule of thumb is that 80% of the homeless want help. But here's the thing, the city seems unable to help them. What are they supposed to do, go to the local shelter, which is already at capacity? The nearby charity facility is also full, and neither of them accept homeless children, which account for 40% of the city's homeless population. The city has been no help here. A proposed shelter for homeless families was shot down by the city because it violated zoning requirements. A shelter for poor pregnant women was denied because it would have been too close to a soup kitchen. Good and generous people in Clearwater are trying to help the homeless and get them off the street, and city officials keep getting in the way. The best way to help the homeless is to make them not homeless anymore, which means jobs and housing for them. But government job and housing programs don't work because it's just one more attempt to paper over a more fundamental problem. The unseen effects of government intervention such as overregulation, zoning, having to get government approval for new projects, rent controls, and so on are all things that contribute to the problem. The way to truly help the homeless is to roll these back and let businesses create more jobs and landlords create more affordable rentals. But once again, it seems that politicians and bureaucrats have never read Bastiat and only look at the seen and not the unseen. So they keep trying to cover the image of the problem by getting the homeless out of view of the public without really helping them at all. Or even worse, incarcerating them at taxpayers' expense and filling up our prisons even more. According to Pinellas County Sheriff Bob Gualtieri, quote, "That's not right, and it's not what it's intended for. We are not in the general homeless population business. That's not our role, and it's not going to be." Is this what it's come to? Banning sitting down? When will politicians realize they can't take problems they caused through their restrictions and solve them with even more restrictions? Some are calling it the world's first cyber hate crime. In a story that's almost too surreal to be believed, Steve Mann, whom some have called the father of wearable computing, was assaulted in a McDonald's in Paris when 3 different employees tried to physically remove his digital eyeglass from his head, something that can only be done with special tools. They then destroyed his support documentation and ejected him from the store. Wearable technology is becoming more prominent as it's becoming more mature. In Mann's case, he's worn some sort of computerized vision system for 34 years. Which he invented to help people with visual impairments see better. He sees it as a great improvement over traditional eyeglasses. His technology is already being used by the Canadian National Institute for the Blind. According to Mann, he had been accepted everywhere he had gone for the 2 weeks he and his family were in Paris, until they entered the McDonald's. An employee inquired about the device, and man explained what it was and showed the employee documentation from his doctor. The employee had no problem with him as a customer. But then, someone else got angry and tried to yank the device off his head, and 2 others joined in. He was then pushed out the door. Ironically, the perps may have sealed their own fate. Although the device ordinarily doesn't record images, when the system is damaged, the most recent images remain in memory. As a result, he has pictures of the 3 perps as well as 2 possible witnesses. They didn't get much help from police, but that's hardly surprising. He's been kicked out of places by police in New York and even had run-ins with the Secret Service because of his digital eyeglass. The motives behind such attacks are beyond comprehension, but we just may see more stories like this as such technology becomes more and more prevalent. We've reported on the attempts by the UK and other European countries to stem the tide of what they call piracy by blocking access to the file-sharing site, the Pirate Bay. And guess what? The plan has worked brilliantly. Traffic to the site has shriveled up. File sharing is all but gone in those countries, and the media companies are seeing increased sales like never before. Nah, I'm just kidding. Did I have you going there? No, the reports are out now showing that these bands haven't done the first thing to curb file sharing. I know, what a shock, right? Back in April, the UK ordered their largest ISPs to block access to the site, but now, just 3 months later, a major UK ISP, who wants to remain anonymous, shared their traffic data with the BBC. Although they did find a small but significant drop in volume after the block was implemented, by this point, it's back up to where it was before. What isn't clear is exactly what's going on. The Pirate Bay is blocked, but as this podcast has reported, there are ways around the blocks. Also, a number of mirror and proxy sites have sprung up to help people gain access. And of course, there are a lot of sites to go to for file sharing other than the Pirate Bay. But apparently, some people just never learn. The BPI, the British Phonographic Agency, who brought the complaint that resulted in the ban, has said that they're going to continue with their efforts. They think, like all politicians and their cronies, that if they continue to do what has failed in the past, suddenly it'll start to work in the future. What's that definition of insanity again? It would be laughable, except that along the way they're absorbing lots of taxpayer dollars while achieving little more than making money for the lawyers. Folks, prohibition doesn't work. The big media conglomerates had their chance to enter into the digital age. They squandered it, and now they're paying the price. And even though services like Netflix exist to help them profit in the 21st century, you still have Warner Brothers and many other companies refusing to stream their content online, apparently thinking that they'll somehow make more money by having fewer people consume their product. This is how you can tell that an industry is supported by little more than government cronyism. It's long past the time that all the political favors ended, leaving these behemoths to die the death they have set up for themselves, and let entrepreneurs come in and design profitable ways to produce entertainment in the digital age. Otherwise, this is only going to get worse with time. This podcast has covered a lot of problems with the way the news media covers events, including bad science reporting, economic ignorance, and biased politicking. Hey, we here at Bogosity are biased politickers too, but at least we admit it and let you know where our biases are, so that you can interpret our commentary accordingly. We don't claim special privileges because we're neutral or fair and balanced or whatever crap they spew out. It's so bad that the news media has been named biggest Bogon emitter no less than 3 times. Small wonder, then, that a Gallup survey has reported that the confidence Americans have in their news media is at an all-time low. Only 21% of adults say they have a great deal, or quite a lot, of confidence in television news. What is the difference between a great deal and quite a lot, anyway? Which one's supposed to be bigger? I hate polls. This isn't just conservatives and us wacky libertarians being ever more skeptical of what the news media puts in front of us, and with good reason. Gallup found that it's liberals that now have the least confidence in television news, with just 19% stating confidence, compared with 20% of moderates and 22% of conservatives. Oddly enough, this didn't translate to party affiliations. Democrats were the group with the greatest confidence. although it was only 37%, compared with 22% of Republicans and 20% for independents. Wait, conservatives and Republicans were both at 22%, independents and moderates were both at 20%, but liberals were at 19% while Democrats were at 37%? How does that math work out? Yeah, I hate polls. Age probably made the biggest difference. The older people were, the less confidence they had, from 18% among seniors to 38% among those 18 to 29. But although the 18 to 29 group was the highest single category of any they counted, even their confidence is dropping, from 39% the year before and 49% the year before that. Hopefully this is a real and good trend that will continue in the future, with more and more adults being skeptical of an institution that people really need to be skeptical about. Like the big media companies, of course they're mostly one of the same things, they're obsolete behemoths, relics of an age that has passed them by as they refuse to change to suit 21st century minds. And now it's time to laugh in the face of this week's biggest Bogon emitter. And for the fourth time, it goes to President Barack Obama for some idiotic and ignorant statements he made at a recent campaign stop in Roanoke, Virginia. Fasten your seatbelts and keep your head and arms inside the fail train. The ride starts now.
So we came together to say we are going to bring about the kinds of changes that allow us to get back to those basics, allow us to restore and live out those values. What we didn't realize was that some of that recklessness, some of that irresponsibility would lead to the worst financial crisis we've seen since the Great Depression.
Well, funny how there are a lot of people who did realize it, and if you'd only listened to them, you wouldn't have kept doing more of the same things that got us into this mess in the first place and wondered why jobs aren't coming back. So don't project your ignorance onto the rest of us just because you couldn't look past your own petty personal politics to implement any sort of the change that needed to be done. Not only does Obama get this completely wrong, but with all the smarmy arrogance of a young earth creationist, he shows a complete ignorance of even the basic economic theories behind government policy.
And on their side, they've got a basic theory about how you grow the economy. They think that the economy grows from the top down.
No, Obama, that's your theory. Top-down economics being managed from a national government and a central bank. What the heck in hockey sticks is he talking about?
Their basic theory is if wealthy investors are doing well, then everybody does well.
Oh, I see. He's confused top-down with trickle-down. Trickle-down is where government money is taken from the people, either in taxes or in inflation, and given to businesses in the hopes that they will use it to create jobs and grow the economy. You know, like what Obama himself has been doing all this time? Like putting our money in failing energy companies like Solyndra and Enter1, continuing ethanol and farm subsidies, greater subsidies for BP and other oil companies after calling for an end to them? On and on and on. His entire job creation policy has been taking wealth from the people and small businesses and giving it to big corporations, mostly his cronies, and hoping they'll use it to create jobs. That's the essence of trickle-down economics, and it is as much a failure here as it has been every other time it's been tried.
So if we spend trillions of dollars on more tax cuts, mostly for the wealthy, that's somehow going to create jobs. Even if we have to pay for it by gutting education and gutting job training programs and gutting transportation projects and maybe even seeing middle-class folks have a higher tax burden.
Well, then maybe you should stop doing that, you think?
I just want to point out that we tried their theory for almost 10 years, and here's what it got us. We got the slowest job growth in decades, deficits as far as the eye can see. Your incomes and your wages didn't go up.
Yeah, and they still didn't go up after you continued every single one of these policies, including more tax cuts and subsidies for your favored rich cronies.
And it culminated in a crisis because there weren't enough regulations on Wall Street.
What? Weren't enough regulations on Wall Street? With tens of thousands of pages of regulations covering the financial markets and stocks and bonds, the problem was not enough regulations? Geez, and the patient died because we didn't use enough leeches.
We don't need more top-down economics. I've got a different view. I believe that you grow the economy from the bottom up.
Well, that would be very nice, if he actually believed it, but it's clear he doesn't. Bottom-up approaches to economic growth are the theories of Mises and Hayek, who realize the growth only comes from individuals interacting with each other, and the government cannot make this happen. The best it can do is to get government out of the way and let it happen. Stop being a roadblock to it.
In 2008, I promised to make sure the middle-class taxes didn't go up.
Yeah, and then you passed the biggest middle-class tax hike in American history, disguising it as healthcare reform, and only coming out as a tax when you couldn't justify it any other way.
And in fact, because of the recession, you needed some help, so we cut the typical family's income taxes by $3,600. So if you hear somebody say that I'm a big tax guy, you just remember $3,600 for the typical family. That's the tax break you've gotten since I've been in office.
He doesn't say where he gets this figure, mostly because it's completely bogus. While it is true that currently the tax burden among the middle class is close to a 50-year low, it's also true that it's been that way since the Bush tax cuts. You know, the supposed tax cuts on the wealthy he was bleating about earlier in his speech? According to the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, quote, in 2000, the year before the 2001 tax cut enacted by President Bush and Congress, the median income family of four paid 8.0% of its income in individual income taxes, according to Tax Policy Center estimates, a smaller share than in any year since 1967, except for 1998 and 1999. The Bush tax cuts further reduced middle income tax obligations. Their chart actually shows the middle class tax burden falling to a low in 2008, and then it's been rising the whole time Obama has been in office. As I've said before, I may not have a PhD in economics, but I can tell when one number is bigger than another.
And I understand why they wouldn't want to pay more in taxes. Nobody likes to pay more in taxes. Here's the problem. If you continue their tax breaks, that costs $1 trillion. And since we're trying to bring down our deficit and our debt, if we spend $1 trillion on tax cuts for them, we're going to have to find that $1 trillion someplace else.
The problem is, empirically we know that you just can't raise revenues above a certain percentage of GDP, and we've been at that percentage for quite a few decades now. So raise taxes, lower taxes, it won't affect revenues until we get the tax rates below about 10%. It'll be GDP, not the tax rate, that determines how much the government takes in revenues. See, taxes are a drag on the economy, and so the more you tax, the less economic activity there is, meaning fewer sales and lower incomes, resulting in lower revenues. It just doesn't work. It'd be really nice if Obama would actually take the time to learn some basic economics so he can find out how this stuff works.
That means we're going to have to maybe make student loans more expensive for students. Or we might have to cut back on the services we're providing our brave veterans when they come home. Or we might have to stop investing in basic science and research that keeps us as a leading edge economy.
Or how about bringing our troops home and cutting our military to a fraction of what it is? Notice how he doesn't want to talk about that option. The fact is, you can cut out everything except Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and defense. Cut it 100%, and you still wouldn't have enough to balance the budget. You have to cut these, and I mean all of these. Just one wouldn't do it if you want to balance the budget and end this spiral of ever-increasing debt we're in.
I don't think those are good ideas.
Well, we've got to do something. The entitlement programs as they stand now are unsustainable, and no matter what you cut elsewhere, no matter how much you raise taxes on the rich, we're still going to be in the mess we're in now as long as they remain these Ponzi-like schemes that just get more and more expensive over time.
They voted for the 33rd time to try to repeal a health care bill we passed 2 years ago after the Supreme Court said it's constitutional.
Yeah, because it's a tax. Hey Obama, did you include those extra taxes when you were talking about your supposed $3,600 middle-class tax cut?
If you think their way of doing things is a recipe for economic growth and helping the middle class, then you should vote for them. You can send those folks to Washington. I promise you they will carry out what they promised to do.
Well, more than I can say for you. How many medical marijuana dispensaries have you raided lately?
When the auto industry was about to go under, 1 million jobs lost. My opponent said, let's let Detroit go bankrupt. What did I say? I said, I'm betting on America's workers.
Well, that may be what you said, but what you actually did was prop up failing businesses in the hopes they would keep or even create jobs. You know that trickle-down stuff you complained about earlier when you wrongly called it top-down?
My opponent He invested in companies who are called pioneers of outsourcing. I don't believe in outsourcing, I believe in insourcing.
Here's the dirty little secret. There is no such thing as outsourcing jobs. If a factory here closes down, it's because that factory isn't profitable, regardless of whether there are workers elsewhere who can do the same job more cheaply. Think about it. You have a factory here in the US. It's making money. Now you find you can open a factory in Taiwan and operate it with even lower costs. So you do that. But why on earth would you close down the US factory? Why would you move those jobs overseas? If the US factory is making money, and that's what business is all about, right? Why would you close down a profitable venture like that? Why wouldn't you open the factory in Taiwan and keep the US factory as well, growing your business even more and gaining even more market share for your company? The answer is you wouldn't, unless the costs of running the US factory were so high that it wasn't making money. In which case, you'd close down the factory anyway, regardless of whether or not you could open one in another country and make money. The choice isn't moving overseas or staying in the US, it's moving overseas or closing down completely. What we need to do is look at the hideous costs of doing business here, such as the fact that businesses pay more money complying with government regulations than they make in profit, and figuring out how to get these costs down. And most of them involve getting government out of the way, exactly the opposite of what Obama wants to do. Obama seems to be all about the auto industry, yet Germany pays its workers twice as much, and its auto companies aren't coming here. They're staying in Germany, despite the fact that German workers get paid more. I wonder what Obama would say about why that is.
So I'm going to reduce the deficit in a balanced way. We've already made $1 trillion worth of cuts.
Where? According to USGovernmentSpending.com, total spending went from $5.9 trillion when Obama took office to $6.3 trillion in 2012 and projected to increase to $7.8 trillion in 2017. So where's this $1 trillion in cuts? Obama is playing the same numbers game the Republicans always have. Project a larger increase, cut the increase by $1 trillion, and claim it's a cut. So if government would have increased to $8.8 trillion, and now it's only going to increase to $7.8 trillion, somehow that means government has shrunk by $1 trillion. All these mindless Obamatons in the audience don't seem to recognize that Obama is playing the Republicans' game, manipulating the numbers and them the same way the Republicans do. There is no difference.
We've already made $1 trillion worth of cuts. We can make another $1 trillion or $1.2 trillion.
Hey, wait a minute. What was that you said earlier?
If we spend $1 trillion on tax cuts for them, we're going to have to find that $1 trillion someplace else. That means we're going to have to maybe make student loans more expensive for students. Or we might have to cut back on the services we're providing our brave veterans when they come home. So I'm going to reduce the deficit in a balanced way. We've already made $1 trillion worth of cuts. We can make another $1 trillion or...
Wow. And now the part that's earned Obama some well-deserved brickbats.
If you've been successful, you didn't get there on your own. You didn't get there on your own. I'm always struck by people who think, well, it must be because I was just so smart. There are a lot of smart people out there. It must be because I worked harder than everybody else. Let me tell you something. There are a whole bunch of hard-working people out there. If you were successful, somebody along the line gave you some help. There was a great teacher somewhere in your life. Somebody helped to create this unbelievable American system that we had that allowed you to thrive. Somebody invested in roads and bridges. If you got a business, that you didn't build that. Somebody else made that happen.
How arrogant can you get? Obama clearly doesn't understand the first thing about the economy, finance, accounting, or even running a business, and yet he arrogantly says that it's his precious government that built it for us, even as that government continues to suck away the highest corporate tax rate from businesses with by far the biggest regulatory burden on the planet, with policies that drive small businesses and even larger businesses into bankruptcy in droves. Here's the thing. All the things he's mentioned, education, roads, and so on, everybody has access to those, right? So if those are the things that make people successful, why isn't everyone successful? Once again, basic logic is all that's needed to expose Obama's bogosity. The ironic thing is there is a truth here about how a genuinely bottom-up economy, unlike what Obama thinks is bottom-up, where somehow government controlling everything is bottom up, works. In his excellent essay, I Pencil, Leonard Read told the story of a pencil that gets made despite the fact that no one in the world knows how to make it. It's the product of a truly bottom-up system of spontaneous development, where all of the players, just voluntary participants in an open market, participate in its creation, most without even realizing they're doing it. Of course, the statists always come in and try to make the government play its part, like the fact that government made the roads. But they only did that by claiming eminent domain and monopoly power over those areas, when in the few places they've been allowed, private roads have worked so much better and are much more well-maintained at lower costs, like the privately funded 91 Express in California, where the roads are clear even when adjacent lanes of government-managed highways are clogged. Or in Paris, where private developers completed a beltway the government couldn't by tunneling under the way, making a double-decker tunnel that holds 6 lanes of traffic where only 2 would have fit before, in less time and for much less money per lane mile than the Big Dig in Massachusetts, and without any deaths either. In both cases, traffic is monitored, and if a motorist breaks down or runs out of gas, he's helped on his way, for free. Even accidents are cleared quickly, because the private managers have a financial incentive to keep traffic moving. And these aren't special cases. When a private company took over the Indiana Tollway, it went from a money-losing prospect to a profitable venture. Snow and ice are now cleared away more quickly, with a massive reduction in costs, including the costs of collecting the tolls. There just isn't any way at all the government can be shown to assist in the making of any product other than its basic functions of protecting those businesses from crime and fraud. And even then, government seems to create enough crime and fraud of its own to more than offset its benefits. Let's bring the fail home.
And they understood that succeeding in America wasn't about how much money was in your bank account, but it was about whether you were doing right by your people, doing right by your family, doing right by your neighborhood, doing right by your community, doing right by your country, living out our values, living out our dreams, living out our hopes.
Actually, Obama, they understood that they were the same thing. Without political cronyism, the only way you can get more money in your bank account is to do right by people, giving them a benefit in excess of the price you're charging them for your product, or your service, or your labor, or whatever you have to trade. In a free market, the profit motive automatically results in doing right by your friends and neighbors and everyone else in society, because you depend on them to make money. Only when you get in the way, only when you take wealth from people and small businesses to give to big corporations that you think are more deserving, only when you implement a justice system that punishes someone for having a few ounces of marijuana more than someone who defrauds people out of millions of dollars, only when you pile on so many regulations that businesses have to hire firms that do nothing but help them through all the red tape, only when government is so heavily intrusive into our lives does there become a disconnect between making money and helping people. And that is exactly what Barack Obama doesn't understand.
God bless you, and God bless the United States of America.
Sorry, Barry, but all the religious platitudes in the world won't undo the smug, self-assured arrogance you displayed here. You've made it clear you do not deserve a second term in office, didn't even deserve the first term, and really don't deserve to be anything other than this week's biggest Bogon emitter. And now it's time to foreclose on this week's
Idiot Extraordinaire.
Diana Carew is an economist at the Progressive Policy Institute. And as the name implies, she seems to think that socialism and long discredited Keynesian economics are just A-OK, and that the broken window fallacy just doesn't apply to her policies. Listen to her debate Peter Schiff on CNBC's Closing Bell.
Because investment in human capital is never a waste of money.
So if we took 100% of our investment dollars and invested them in what she calls human capital, in other words, put it all into education, and we didn't have any investment in computer technology, new ways to process materials, new ways of doing business, and completely new types of businesses, none of that, that it would be the best of all possible worlds? She clearly can't believe that. Yet the extreme scenario shows that what she says just isn't true. If 100% of our investment dollars would be too much to spend, then there must be a point of diminishing returns, where it does become a waste to invest in more of it. This alone should give you an idea of how much you should trust the economics coming from the Progressive Policy Institute.
Especially young college graduates have been hard hit by the recession, a recession they never predicted.
Well, again, some economists did predict it, but they're not the ones at the Progressive Policy Institute. Hey, Carew, one of the ones who saw it coming ahead of time is the one you're debating right now.
We need to invest in our future. We need to invest in that can't pay for their debt. And so the problem is having out of this is to educate kids and get them into jobs that are better paid.
Let me get a word in here, because wasting money, overpaying for worthless degrees is not going to help the economy. In fact, it hurts the economy.
No degree is worthless. You're always acquiring skills. You're always acquiring skills.
Hey, Carew, maybe if you stopped running your mouth, spewing out platitudes, and actually listened to someone else, you'd get the clue. A degree is worthless if it costs more to get it than can be made up in increased salaries. The average student loan is around $25,000. After interest payments are made, that can easily turn into $35,000 or $40,000.
Plenty of people went to college before the government got involved. It just didn't cost nearly as much. People didn't graduate college with a mortgage. Now they do.
I don't think colleges are setting prices based on how much students can take out of banks.
Yeah, of course. No. They're basing their prices on the fact that students can borrow money with government guarantees. If the government got out of the market...
I think there's more to it than that.
No, there isn't. That's exactly the problem.
I disagree.
Wow. Okay, here's a hint. If someone doesn't understand that prices, all prices, are set by supply and demand, then they are a bad economist. No concept is more fundamental to economics than supply and demand. And if you make it easier to get bigger loans, then more people are going to get the bigger loans. And this pushes the demand curve out, increasing both price and quantity. Basic economics. Now listen to what this idiot woman says after Schiff calls her out on it.
If the government got out of the market, students couldn't borrow money so cheaply. Interest rates would rise, and students wouldn't be able to bid up prices.
Right, colleges so then you get to decide who gets to go to college.
How desperate can you get? No, Carew, it won't be Peter Schiff deciding who goes to college, and it won't be you and your political cronies either. It'll be the students themselves deciding whether or not college is worth the money based on what its true costs are. And those true costs, as Schiff pointed out, will be a lot lower without all this government help. Meaning that more people will be able to afford to go to college without all this massive debt that she's complaining about. Once again, we see a statist arguing for a policy that actually undermines her stated goals.
I would be hard-pressed to find somebody that would suggest that investing in college education is a bad investment.
Yeah, you found me. It's a lousy investment. We are squandering our wealth.
It's never a lousy investment, and when that's the case, then we've got a real problem on our hands, because the only way forward, the only way to invest in our future is through education.
Here's the difference between a good economist and a bad economist. A good economist looks at the seen and the unseen effects of a policy. A bad economist only looks at the seen. Carew is only looking at the students graduating, and she isn't seeing the capital that's being misdirected from other areas to pay for it. In essence, we could be said to be in a college bubble right now. And if Carew had her way, it would just keep getting bigger and bigger until it inevitably bursts.
If we simply got the government out of education, college tuitions would plunge. Colleges would be forced to compete.
I do not agree with that. I do not think basic college. I think there's. I'm well aware of basic economics. Thank you. But I would argue that. Yes, I am. Thank you.
No, you are not, because you don't understand basic supply and demand. I think I just found someone with a worthless degree, and it's Diana Carew, who doesn't understand supply and demand, who doesn't look at the unseen as well as the seen, and who has only shown herself fit to be this week's Idiot Extraordinaire. Well, that wraps up this futuristic, socialistic, big statistic, parasitic, euphemistic, go-ballistic, surrealistic, cunning linguistic, and high-functioning autistic edition of the Bogosity Podcast. Please visit the forums of Bogosity.tv, where you can read the show notes and join the discussion on these and other subjects. This podcast is free, but not free to produce, so please use the donate button at the top of the Bogosity.tv website or down the right-hand side of the podcast page and give generously to keep this podcast going. And if you'd like to contribute to the podcast, just send a question, statement, news article, or rant to podcast@bogosity.tv. Put it in an audio file, and if it's good enough, it'll get played right in the podcast. Thank you for listening. Until next time, here's a quote from Petronius. I believe that school makes complete fools of our young men because they see and hear nothing of ordinary life there. The Bogosity Podcast is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 3.0 Imported License.
Bogosity.
Do you want answers to creationist claims against evolution? Would you like to know more about evolution yourself, or even engage creationists more directly, with actual peer-reviewed sources to back you up? My book, How Evolution is Scientific, is designed to show the basics of evolutionary theory and how it is so well supported using the scientific method. It's impeccably sourced, with references to the actual scientific material, and is arranged using the creationists' own criteria of what is scientific. Using their own arguments against them, see how evolution is scientific, but creationism is not, based on observations, accurate predictions, logic, and evidence. Get answers to common creationist claims, and even a primer on abiogenesis, the start of all life. It's all in my book, How Evolution is Scientific, available at Amazon and on Kindle, EPUB, and PDF as well. Get How Evolution is Scientific and never be taken in by creationists again.